For decades, Venezuela was one of the richest, most prosperous countries in Latin America. It sat on the world's largest proven oil reserves. That's right, more oil than Saudi Arabia, more than Iran, more than anyone. The country was swimming in black gold, and yet, today, it's a shadow of its former self. The economy has collapsed, millions have fled, and its people have endured unimaginable hardship. But this wasn't a collapse caused by war. It wasn't triggered by a devastating natural disaster. This was a man-made catastrophe, born from decades of economic mismanagement. This is the story of how Venezuela's economy broke itself, and how the seeds of its destruction were sown long before the political chaos we see today. To understand what happened, we need to go back to the source of its wealth, oil. Venezuela made a single, fatal decision. It built its entire national identity, its government spending, its entire economic model on the price of oil. At its peak, oil accounted for over 90% of all export revenue. It was the engine of the country, the source of all good things. When oil prices were high, like in the 2000s, money poured into the country like a tidal wave. The government, flush with cash, went on a historic spending spree. It launched massive social programs, subsidized everything from gasoline to groceries, and took on enormous debt, assuming the good times would last forever. But here's the problem with building your house on a foundation of oil. The price is volatile. It goes up, but it also comes down. Instead of saving that oil wealth during the boom years, creating a rainy day fund, or diversifying the economy, Venezuela did the opposite. It spent every dollar it earned, and then some. It borrowed against future oil sales. Industries outside of oil, like agriculture and manufacturing, were neglected and withered away. Why bother making anything at home when you can just import it with petrodollars? This created a dangerous dependency, a national addiction to high oil prices. Then, in 2014, the inevitable happened. The global price of oil collapsed. It plummeted from over $100 a barrel to less than $50. For Venezuela, this was a national heart attack. Its income was slashed by tens of billions of dollars almost overnight. The government's spending promises, however, remained. The subsidies, the debt payments, the massive public sector payroll, all of that still needed to be paid. But the money was gone. There was no backup plan. The oil trap had snapped shut. With its primary source of income decimated, the government was faced with a choice: either make painful cuts to spending or find another way to get money. It chose the second option. It turned on the printing presses. To cover the massive budget deficit, the central bank began printing money. Lots of it. And this is where the economic death spiral truly began. You see, printing money without a corresponding increase in economic production doesn't create wealth. It just devalues the money already in circulation. It's like pouring water into a glass of juice. The more water you add, the more diluted and tasteless the juice becomes. Between 2016 and 2019, Venezuela entered a state of hyperinflation that was almost beyond comprehension. At its peak, the annual inflation rate exceeded 100,000%. Think about that. Prices were doubling every few weeks. A person's entire monthly salary might only be enough to buy a carton of eggs by the end of the month. People's life savings, stored in the local currency, the bolivar, were wiped out. They became worthless. The currency became so devalued that people stopped counting bills and started weighing them. Citizens would carry backpacks stuffed with stacks of cash just to buy a loaf of bread or a bottle of milk. The very concept of money, as a stable store of value, was destroyed. This wasn't just an economic crisis anymore. It was a societal breakdown. As the currency collapsed, another, more immediate crisis emerged: a massive shortage of food and basic goods. Remember how Venezuela had neglected its own production in favor of imports? Well, with no dollars to pay for those imports, the ships stopped arriving, and the local farms and factories that were left couldn't function. They lacked spare parts, raw materials, and a stable currency to operate. Supermarket shelves went from full to empty almost overnight. Lines for basic necessities like flour, rice, and toilet paper would stretch for blocks, with people waiting for hours, often for nothing. This scarcity led to a grim phenomenon that Venezuelans themselves cynically called the Maduro diet. It wasn't a new health trend. It was a term for the widespread, unintentional weight loss suffered by millions. Studies from the time showed that the average Venezuelan lost a significant amount of body weight, not by choice, but because they simply could not find enough food to eat. This wasn't the result of a deliberate policy. It was the direct human consequence of total economic failure. The crisis didn't stop with empty wallets and empty stomachs. It infected every part of the country's infrastructure. The systems that keep a modern society running began to rot from the inside out. The national power grid, once a source of pride, started to fail. Years of underinvestment, lack of maintenance, and the flight of skilled engineers meant that power plants were crumbling. In March 2019, the breaking point came. A series of massive, nationwide blackouts plunged most of the country into darkness for days at a time. Hospitals lost power, their backup generators failing. Water pumps stopped working, cutting off access to clean water. Communication systems went down. Public transport ground to a halt. It was a complete societal shutdown. This wasn't a random accident. The electrical system had been deteriorating for years. Infrastructure decays slowly, quietly, until one day it fails all at once. And in Venezuela, everything was failing at once. Fuel shortages became common in a country with the world's largest oil reserves. The refineries were broken. The expertise was gone. Faced with this complete collapse of normal life, people made the only rational choice they could: they left. This triggered one of the largest migration crises in modern history. More than 7 million Venezuelans have fled their homeland since the crisis began. That's over 20% of the population. But it wasn't just a random cross-section of society. It was a brain drain of epic proportions. Doctors, engineers, teachers, skilled technicians, entrepreneurs, the very people a country needs to function and rebuild, were the first to leave. An economy is not just numbers and charts. It's people, it's human capital. When a nation loses its most skilled and educated citizens, it loses its capacity to recover. The exodus made a terrible situation catastrophically worse. Now, it's impossible to talk about Venezuela's crisis without mentioning sanctions, particularly those imposed by the United States. Many supporters of the government blame sanctions for everything. The opposition often points to them as a necessary tool. What's the truth? The reality is more complex. The harshest economic sanctions, the ones that targeted the oil industry, were imposed in 2017 and intensified in 2019. By that time, the Venezuelan economy was already in a freefall. Oil production had already collapsed by over 2/3 from its peak. Hyperinflation was already raging. The food shortages were already a daily reality. The brain drain was well underway. Did sanctions make things worse? Absolutely. They restricted access to international finance and made it harder for the government to sell oil, further strangling its income. But sanctions did not start the fire. The house was already burning down. Sanctions were like gasoline poured on the flames. They exposed and amplified the profound weaknesses that had been rotting the economy from within for years. By the early 2020s, the economic damage was nearly irreversible. The currency was destroyed. The country's industrial and agricultural base was gone. Its critical infrastructure was in ruins. Its institutions were hollowed out. And, most importantly, the trust between the people, the government, and the economy was completely shattered. At this point, the political crisis was simply a reflection of the economic one. Because no government, no matter its ideology, can survive indefinitely when its economy can no longer feed its people, keep the lights on, or provide a basic future. Economics eventually dictates politics. The real verdict on Venezuela is this: it did not fall overnight. It wasn't the victim of a single bad decision or a single bad leader. It was a slow, agonizing dismantling of a nation's wealth, driven by bad incentives. A complete dependence on a single commodity. reckless spending, and a stubborn denial of basic economic principles. The flood of oil money masked the deep, structural problems for years. Printing money accelerated the collapse. But eventually, reality arrived, and it was relentless. This story is more than just a tragedy for the Venezuelan people. It is a powerful warning for every country. It shows what happens when governments ignore the fundamental laws of economics. When they believe that political will can somehow overcome financial reality, the economy delivers its verdict quietly at first, through subtle signs and warnings. But if those warnings are ignored, it will eventually deliver its verdict without mercy. Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis valuable, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world. See you next time.